Imagine, like, trying to stand a dead body upright on its feet.
Oh, wow. Okay, starting dark today.
Right, I know, but just picture it. You prop it up by the shoulders, you step back, and it instantly collapses. So you think, well, maybe it's a balance issue. You adjust the feet, you try again, and bam, it just falls right back over.
Yeah, gravity always wins that one.
Exactly. And that morbid, slightly disturbing image, it wasn't pulled from some, modern horror movie. It was actually written in the late 1600s by a renegade Puritan preacher. He used it to explain exactly what is wrong with how so many of us approach our search for spirituality.
It's a striking image.
It really is. He's basically saying you can prop up the outside all you want, you can adjust the posture, but eventually you have to realize what he realized, which is there must be something within.
So welcome to the deep dive. Today we are opening up a 17th century masterpiece. It's called A Body of Divinity by Thomas Watson, and it was originally published in 1692.
And we have quite the stack of material for this one. We really do. We've got the book itself, obviously, along with biographical details on Watson, thematic analyses, and even some modern devotionals that are based entirely on his work.
It's a massive text, a compilation of 176 sermons, actually.
Yeah, which sounds incredibly daunting. But our explicit mission today is to take this historic, massive text and translate it. We want to strip away all the intimidating technical jargon, all the academic fluff, and discover how these timeless truths can practically transform your daily life. Because if you're like me, when you hear the phrase Puritan theology, your brain immediately pictures a dusty, boring textbook.
Oh, completely.
Like written by guys in stiff black collars who are fundamentally opposed to anyone, anywhere having a good time.
Yeah, the classic killjoy stereotype.
Yes.
But, I mean, it is the absolute definition of an unfair stereotype.
Yeah.
And honestly, it's one that robs us of so much wisdom. For Thomas Watson, theology was never this, speculative abstraction.
Yeah, it wasn't just head knowledge.
Exactly.
Hmm.
He wasn't interested in armchair philosophy or having these academic debates just for the sake of looking smart. He practiced what his generation called practical divinity.
Practical divinity, I like that.
Yeah, the entire goal, literally the only reason to study God, was to move the head toward truth so that it could definitively move the heart toward God. If what you learned didn't actively change how you lived or how you loved, and crucially how you suffered, well, he considered it entirely useless.
Okay, I have to admit that completely reframes how I'm looking at this whole thing. It's not about passing a spiritual written exam, It's about building a life that doesn't collapse when you let go of the shoulders.
Which perfectly sets up where Watson actually starts his entire project.
Right, because before we can get to the beautiful poetic element of faith, we have to talk about the concrete in the ground.
Yeah, the foundation. He believed that deep foundational knowledge of God was absolutely critical for the everyday believer. He didn't want this left to the professional clergy, the guys in the robes. He wanted every single person to be, in his own words, grounded and settled.
Grounded and settled. And the method for getting grounded and settled was something he called catechesis.
Yes, catechesis.
Let's pause right there because, catechesis is one of those imposing words that makes people want to just tune out. What exactly is that? It sounds like a medical procedure.
It does sound a bit clinical, doesn't it? But it's actually this beautiful, ancient concept. Think of a catechism like a spiritual FAQ.
Okay, FAQ.
Yeah, a foundational cheat sheet. Historically, a catechism is just a summary of religious principles, usually formatted as a series of simple questions and answers. It was designed so that children, or someone completely new to the faith, could memorize the core tenets of what they believed.
Just to have it locked in.
Exactly. Watson was deeply concerned that without this basic foundational FAQ internalized in the mind, believers would become inherently unstable. They would just be tossed around by whatever the popular opinion of the day happened to be.
And he uses some incredibly vivid imagery to explain what that instability looks like, right?
Whatever it does.
Drawing from the biblical book of Jude, he compares believers without a foundation to wandering stars or meteors. But our modern understanding of a meteor kind of ruins the analogy, I think. Today, we know a meteor is a massive rock burning up in the atmosphere. How did a 17th century person view a meteor?
That's a really crucial distinction to make. In Watson's time, they didn't view meteors as solid celestial bodies. They understood them as dry exhalations, basically pockets of swamp gas that would rise up into the atmosphere, ignite, shine extremely brightly for a brief spectacular second, and then just fizzle out.
Then fall to the earth.
Right. They weren't made of the pure, enduring light of the fixed stars. So when Watson says that people who aren't grounded in the fundamentals of their faith are like meteors, he is making a devastating psychological observation. He's talking about the flash-in-the-pan enthusiast.
Oh, wow. Okay. So he's talking about the person who goes to a retreat or maybe watches a highly emotional video online and is suddenly completely on fire.
Yes.
They're making dramatic declarations, they're full of zeal, but there's no actual substance behind it. They're just burning spiritual swamp gas.
That's precisely it. They flash brightly with initial enthusiasm, but because they haven't done the hard work of building a foundation, because they don't actually know who or what they are being enthusiastic about, they wander.
Right.
They drift from one charismatic speaker to another, from one spiritual trend to the next, and eventually they just burn out entirely. Wow. They vanish.
Man. He also uses the analogy of a ship, which I think translates perfectly to today. He describes a ship without ballast. And for anyone who doesn't know, ballast is the heavy weight placed deep in the hull of a ship to provide stability.
Right, to keep it upright.
Yeah. Watson says you can have a ship with the most magnificent sails. It might look absolutely beautiful sitting safely in the harbor, but the absolute second it catches a strong wind out on the open ocean, it overturns because there's no weight at the bottom holding it steady against the pressure.
And that is the crux of why doctrine matters. Watson writes, knowledge of principles is to the soul as the anchor to the ship.
The anchor.
Yes. When you go through intense suffering, when you are hit with profound, dark nights of doubt, or when you are just swimming in the cultural confusion of the modern world, vague spirituality completely fails you.
Just feeling spiritual isn't enough.
No, a generalized sense that, the universe has my back, or there's a higher power out there, that does absolutely nothing to hold you steady when you unexpectedly lose your job, or when a doctor walks into the room with a terrible diagnosis.
Yeah, in those moments the wind is tearing at your sails.
Exactly. Doctrine. The hard, solid, immovable truths about who God is and what he has done is the ballast. It is the heavy weight in the hull that keeps you from capsizing.
I hear that, and the ship analogy makes total sense. But I have to push back here on behalf of the listener, because if you're listening to this, you might be thinking, doesn't focusing so much on doctrine and principles and catechisms strip all the emotion out of a relationship with God?
That's a very common reaction.
It makes it sound like a rigid math equation, like it's just about getting the theological formulas right, checking the boxes, and turning in your homework. How is that supposed to inspire a profound love for Christ, which is, frankly, the whole mission of this deep dive?
It's a very fair pushback.
Yeah.
Because we've all encountered people who use theology as a weapon or like some sort of trivia game to prove they're smarter than you.
Exactly.
But remember, Watson's definition of practical divinity. The head moves so the heart can follow. The doctrine isn't the end goal. It is the scaffolding.
Okay, let me throw an analogy out there. Tell me if I'm tracking with him. It sounds to me like Watson is saying you need to know the basic grammar of a language before you can write a beautiful, heartfelt poem.
Oh, that's good.
Right. The grammar isn't the point. No one cries reading a grammar textbook.
Definitely not.
The poetry is the point. The emotion, the connection, the beauty, that's the point. But if you don't know the grammar, your spiritual poetry just becomes incoherent rambling. You can't express anything meaningful. You need the rigid structure of the grammar so that your affections have a safe, clear channel to flow through.
That perfectly captures his intent, yes.
Yeah.
The grammar provides the structure for the beauty to exist and be communicated clearly. Without the grammar of doctrine, when the pressure is on, your faith loses its vocabulary. And once you have that grammatical foundation laid, it allows you to do something incredible. It allows you to answer the single most important question of human existence.
Okay, so if the foundation is that crucial, what exactly are we building on it? How does Watson define the actual point of all this?
Well, he starts by turning to the Westminster Shorter Catechism.
Okay, there's that word again. Give me the quick context on the Westminster Shorter Catechism. Who wrote it, and why does Watson care about it so much?
Right. So in the 1640s, an assembly of theologians gathered at Westminster Abbey in London. Their goal was to unify the church by articulating the core doctrines of the Christian faith. They produced several documents, but the Shorter Catechism was specifically designed to be taught to children and lay people.
Like the FAQ we talked about.
Exactly. It consists of 107 questions and answers. And Thomas Watson's book, A Body of Divinity, is actually just a massive, incredibly detailed exposition of this exact catechism. He takes these concise, deeply theological answers and unpacks them with all the poetic imagery and practical application we've been talking about.
And he starts right at the very beginning. Question number 1 of the Catechism. What is the chief end of man? Which is really just a 17th century way of asking, why am I here? What is the ultimate purpose of my life?
Yes,
And the answer to that question is arguably one of the most famous sentences in English theology.
it is. The answer is, man's chief end is to glorify God and to enjoy him forever.
To glorify God and to enjoy him forever. Let's really pull that apart.
It is the bedrock of his entire theology. And the most crucial thing to notice is that it is a twofold, utterly inseparable purpose.
Inseparable.
Yes, it is not just to glorify God like some dutiful, miserable servant who hates his boss but does the work anyway. And it's not just to enjoy God like a selfish consumer who just wants the perks of the universe without acknowledging the Creator. It is inextricably both.
So how does he actually define glorifying God? Because that can sound like we're just supposed to sit around singing songs all day, which isn't practical for someone who has a mortgage to pay.
Right, Watson breaks down glorifying God into four specific active components: appreciation, adoration, affection, and subjection.
Okay, walk me through those.
First, appreciation. You mentally recognize and value his infinite worth. Second, adoration. You express that worth in worship and awe. Third, affection. Your heart is genuinely drawn to him in love. And fourth, subjection. You willingly yield your daily life, your decisions, and your will to his rule.
And to explain how this actually looks in real life, Watson gives us this incredibly grounding image.
Yeah.
He calls the glory of God a silver thread.
The silver thread. I love this one.
Yeah, he says the silver thread must run through all our actions. This isn't just about what you do in a church building on a Sunday, whether you're eating, drinking, working, or playing. That silver thread has to be woven into the fabric of the activity itself.
He brings it down to the most elemental level. He uses this wonderful folksy analogy about milk. Yeah, he points out that when milk is allowed to settle, the richest part, the cream, rises to the top. In the same way, when a Christian is finally settled in the truth, when they aren't wandering like meteors, when they have that heavy ballast of doctrine, the absolute best part of their character rises to the surface.
Ah, the cream rises.
Exactly. And what is that cream of Christian character? It's zeal and love for God.
I want to make sure I understand the mechanics of this, though. How does zeal and love translate into action? Because I can feel very zealous sitting alone in my room, but that doesn't seem to help anyone else.
Watson anticipates that exact question. He compares a good Christian to the sun. Now think about what the sun actually does. It doesn't just sit statically in the sky. It does two simultaneous things.
Okay.
First, it sends forth immense heat, which Watson compares to our internal affection and burning love for God. But second, it goes its continuous circuit around the world, bringing light and life to everything it touches.
The heat and the circuit.
Yes. Watson compares this circuit to vigorous, active obedience. You cannot have just the internal heat of affection without the external circuit of obedience. They are the same celestial body.
And this is where his concept of enjoying God really locks in for me, because if I'm commanded to do all this, to appreciate, adore, subject myself, and run this vigorous, exhausting circuit of obedience, it sounds like I'm a slave.
It sounds heavy.
Yeah. But Watson makes it explicitly clear that we do not serve a selfish, insecure master who demands our misery to prop up his own ego.
Right. Watson says that God has twisted together his glory and our good. They are the same rope. When you are most completely glorifying God, you are simultaneously experiencing your highest possible joy.
Wow.
He writes that God doesn't need our glory. He is infinitely glorious on his own. The act of glorifying him is actually the mechanism by which we are filled with joy.
Here is where this hits home for your daily routine. Like, think about your actual normal Thursday. You're stuck in traffic on the commute. You're sitting in a mind-numbing spreadsheet meeting. You're folding endless piles of laundry. Or maybe you're sitting by the bed of a sick parent. The modern mindset trains us to think that these moments are just filler.
Just something to get through.
Exactly. That the spiritual stuff only happens when you finally get a quiet moment with a cup of coffee and a journal, or when you are volunteering at a soup kitchen. We treat the mundane as a distraction from the profound.
Yes, the sacred-secular divide. We compartmentalize our lives so heavily.
We do. But Watson is absolutely shattering that divide here. He is saying that the silver thread belongs in the laundry room. It belongs in the office cubicle. It belongs in the hospital waiting room. Those mundane, frustrating tasks aren't distractions from your faith. They're the exact fabric you are invited to weave the silver thread into.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
You can glorify and deeply enjoy God while you are scrubbing a frying pan because you are doing it with affection and subjection to the reality He placed you in. It completely and utterly dignifies ordinary life. There are no throwaway
It
moments.
elevates every single second of human existence.
Hmm.
But this naturally creates a massive theological pivot in his book.
How so?
Because if our ultimate goal is to glorify and enjoy God, we are forced to ask, who exactly is this God?
Yeah.
You cannot genuinely enjoy someone you do not intimately know. And you certainly cannot glorify a God you have false, cartoonish ideas about.
Right, you can't weave a silver thread if you don't know what the thread is made of.
Exactly. So Watson transitions from analyzing our purpose to analyzing his nature. This brings us to a sweeping exploration of the divine attributes.
And let's be clear, Watson pulls zero punches here. He doesn't start with the easy, warm, fuzzy attributes. He dives straight into the deep end of the theological pool, exploring God as a pure spirit, infinite, omnipresent, unchangeable, and omniscient.
Heavy words.
Very heavy. To a modern ear, these sound like sterile, philosophical concepts. They are massive, mind-bending ideas that usually make people's eyes just glaze over.
They do, because we often divorce the attribute from the application. But watch how Watson brings them right down to the pavement of human experience. Let's take omnipresence, for example. The standard definition of omnipresence is simply that God is everywhere at once.
Which usually just makes us think of him like oxygen. It's everywhere, but it's invisible and completely impersonal.
Right. But Watson personalizes it.
Yep.
He argues that because God is a pure spirit who is everywhere present, he is not confined to some upper region in a distant heaven.
He's not just up there.
No. He is not a monarch sitting in a castle light years away, waiting for you to send a message via courier. Because he is omnipresent, Watson says a trembling soul can converse with him right here, right now, on Earth.
Wow.
The implication is staggering. There's no physical location, no prison cell, no lonely apartment where you are disconnected from the direct, immediate presence of the divine.
You don't have to climb a spiritual mountain to get a signal. He is in the room with you right now.
Yes.
But let's look at omniscience, the idea that God knows absolutely everything. Honestly, for a lot of people, that is a terrifying concept.
It really can be.
It feels like having a cosmic surveillance camera watching every single mistake, every petty thought, every failure. It breeds paranoia.
It absolutely does breed paranoia if you misunderstand his character. If you think God is a cosmic policeman eager to write you a ticket, omniscience is a nightmare. But Watson completely flips the psychological script here.
How does he do that?
He says that because God is omniscient, he sees everything, which includes seeing the hidden flower of grace beneath the massive weeds of our corruption.
Hold on. The hidden flower of grace beneath the weeds of our corruption? That completely changes the paradigm.
It is profoundly pastoral. Think about how human beings operate. We look at ourselves, especially when we're trying to grow spiritually, and we usually only see the weeds. We see our failures, our bad habits, our selfish motives, our short tempers.
Yeah, we zero in on the flaws.
We judge ourselves brutally, and we conclude, I'm a fraud. There is no real grace in me at all.
We suffer from massive spiritual imposter syndrome.
Exactly. We condemn ourselves. But God, precisely because he is all-knowing, is not fooled by the weeds. He looks past the mess of your failures, and he sees the sincere, faltering, tiny attempts you are making to love him.
Easy effort.
He sees the tiny seed of faith that you are completely blind to. His omniscience isn't a spotlight meant to shame you. It is a microscopic lens that finds the genuine life inside you when you can't find it yourself.
That is incredibly liberating. It means I don't have to constantly prove my sincerity to him because he already knows it's there, even when I'm doubting it myself.
Precisely.
And that leads right into the attribute of immutability, the unchangeableness of God. Watson points out that God may change his countenance, meaning he might allow us to experience hardship or feel the sting of discipline or go through seasons where he feels distant, but he never, ever changes his heart. The sources highlight Watson's use of the Hebrew word olam.
Yes, olam. It translates to an everlasting love, a love that predates the mountains and will outlast the stars. It is an immovable reality.
Okay, but I need to jump in and play devil's advocate here.
Go for it.
Because this is the exact moment where my mind hits a wall and I know I'm not alone. If God is completely immutable, if his decrees are totally unchangeable, if he already knows everything that will happen and has planned everything out from eternity past, then why should I bother? Why should you, listening to this, wake up tomorrow and try to grow? Why bother praying if the outcome is already locked in? Doesn't this heavy doctrine of immutability just breed a toxic spiritual fatalism? Like, whatever will be, so I'm just going to sit on the couch and do nothing.
You've just articulated the single most common objection to Puritan theology, and it's a logical trap.
Yeah.
But Watson anticipates this exact paralysis, and his counter-argument is brilliant. He argues that we fundamentally misunderstand how God's decrees work.
Okay, lay it on me.
God does not merely decree the end result. He simultaneously decrees the means by which that result will be achieved.
What does that actually mean in practice? Break down the mechanics of ends and means for us.
Watson uses a very physical, undeniable analogy. Let's say God has decreed exactly how long you will live. The absolute number of your days is fixed. It is an immutable decree. Does knowing that make you stop eating food?
Well, no, if I stop eating, I'll starve.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because God has decreed that you will live those specific days by means of eating, drinking, and breathing. The end of your lifespan is tied to the means nutrition. If you stubbornly refuse to eat, you will die, and you'll be entirely responsible for your own starvation. Can't blame the decree.
Right.
In the exact same way, God decrees your spiritual salvation and growth, but you must still actively seek Him. He decrees that you will grow in grace, but He decrees that this growth will happen through the specific means of prayer, reading the Word, and striving against sin.
So I can't divorce the end goal from the path He has laid out to get there. The anchor is completely secure, it's holding the ship, but I still have to, pull on the rope to get to the harbor.
That's a great way to synthesize it. The immutability of God isn't an excuse for laziness. It is the absolute guarantee that your hard work won't be wasted.
Okay, that clears the roadblock for me. But it brings us to a new tension. We have established this infinite, unchangeable, all-knowing, pure spirit of a God. But let's be deeply honest. When you really think about an infinite, perfectly holy God, it is terrifying.
It should be.
If I'm flawed, selfish, and full of weeds, how can I possibly approach a blazing fire of divine holiness? It's like standing next to an exposed nuclear reactor. It will just obliterate me. How do we bridge that impossible gap so we can actually enjoy Him?
That is the ultimate human dilemma. The majesty that we are supposed to enjoy is the very majesty that should consume us.
Yeah.
And that leads us directly to the absolute center of Watson's theology.
Yeah.
The person of Jesus Christ.
A mediator.
Yes. If we are to approach this blazing fire without being destroyed, we desperately need a mediator, a go-between. And this is where Watson turns to the doctrine of the incarnation Christ taking on human flesh.
And the imagery Watson uses here to explain the incarnation is some of the most striking in the entire book. He wants to explain how God solved the nuclear reactor problem.
Right.
He uses the analogy of a sheepskin. According to Watson, ancient shepherds would often wear sheepskins over their clothes. They didn't do this for warmth. They did it so that the easily frightened sheep wouldn't be terrified of them. The sheep see the skin, they recognize something familiar, and they feel safe approaching the shepherd.
It's an incredible picture of divine condescension. The infinite, terrifying God clothed Himself in our exact flesh, in human nature, so that we could look upon the divine nature without absolute, overwhelming terror. He veiled His unapproachable light so that we could draw near.
And Watson doesn't stop at the sheepskin. He calls the cross a pulpit from which Christ preached His love to the world in blood. He calls Christ the most precious pearl in the gospel. But what I find really fascinating is how Watson systematically unpacks the mechanics of how Christ mediates for us through three specific historical roles: prophet, priest, and king.
Yes, the threefold office of Christ. This is standard Reformed theology, but again, Watson breathes intense life into it. Let's look at how he describes Christ as our prophet.
Okay.
A prophet's job is to reveal truth. But Watson says Christ doesn't just give us external information. He doesn't just hand us a manual. He gives us internal eye salve.
Eye salve, like medicine for blindness.
Exactly. He applies this salve to our blind spiritual eyes so that we can finally see the reality of our own condition. Watson specifically says Christ illuminates the swarms of vain thoughts in our own hearts.
But wait, seeing all my own vanity and corruption? That sounds awful. It sounds incredibly painful to suddenly realize how deeply flawed you are.
It is deeply painful. True self-knowledge always shatters the ego. But it is necessary surgery. You have to know you are sick to accept the cure. And that is where the second role comes in. Christ as our priest.
You're right, priest.
Now, a priest's job is to offer a sacrifice to satisfy justice. We often picture this as a very cold, legal, bureaucratic transaction, like a lawyer paying off a fine at a courthouse.
Right, checking off a legal requirement so God isn't mad anymore.
But Watson obliterates that cold image.
Yeah.
He describes Christ interceding for us feelingly. He uses an analogy that would resonate deeply with anyone. He compares Jesus to a mother pleading before a judge for the life of her condemned child.
Oh, wow.
Think about the intense, visceral emotion of a mother in that situation. She isn't reading from a legal script. She is weeping. Her bowels yearn for the child. Watson is saying that Christ presents his own blood to satisfy divine justice, but he does it with that exact level of intense, personal, agonizing love for you.
That drastically changes how I picture Jesus right now. He's not a detached lawyer. He's a deeply invested advocate.
Exactly.
And then finally, there is the role of king. A king rules and defends. But again, Watson brings it inward. Christ the King doesn't just rule a distant political empire. He actively invades your life to beat off the chains of sin that hold you captive. You can't break your own chains, so the king comes in and breaks them for you. He conquers the rebellion that you couldn't defeat in your own heart.
When you synthesize all of this, the prophet who heals your blindness, the priest who weeps for your pardon, the king who breaks your chains, you are confronted with a breathtaking paradox.
The paradox of humility. I was so struck by this reading the sources. We have a God who humbles himself to an incomprehensible degree, taking on a sheepskin, while we, as utterly flawed humans, constantly try to exalt ourselves, build our own little empires, and prove how great we are.
It's absurd.
It is such an unseemly, embarrassing sight when you put human pride side by side with divine humility. Watson asks this piercing rhetorical question: what king would be willing to wear sackcloth over his clock of gold?
And the historical answer is absolutely none of them. Kings wear gold to prove they are better than everyone else.
Exactly. No human king would ever strip off his royalty to wear the itchy, ugly sackcloth of a beggar. But Christ did. He took on our frailty, our pain, our dust. When you truly grasp the sheepskin analogy, it should instantly and completely dissolve any human pride. You can't boast about your promotion or your bank account or how moral you are when the creator of the universe had to wear sackcloth to save you.
That is the exact psychological reaction Watson is aiming for. He wants the doctrine to crush your pride and birth deep, genuine devotion. But understanding that Christ provided this incredible cure through his life, death, and resurrection brings us to the next massive question.
Right. It's one thing to know the cure exists. It's another thing entirely to know how it helps me. How does the listener actually experience this healing? How does the historical work of Jesus 2,000 years ago become my personal reality today?
Yes.
This moves us from Christ's objective work in history to the internal, highly personal work of faith and sanctification.
We are moving from the pharmacy to the bloodstream. And Watson is incredibly precise here. He states that faith is an appropriating act.
Define appropriating. Because in modern slang, appropriating usually means stealing something that isn't yours.
Fair point.
Yeah.
In theological terms, appropriating means to lay hold of something, to make it your own personal possession. Watson uses a brilliant medical analogy to explain this.
Okay.
Imagine you have a terrifying terminal disease. Now imagine there is a bottle of medicine on the table in front of you. This medicine is made of Christ's own blood. It is the most sovereign, powerful, guaranteed cure in the entire universe. It has a 100% success rate.
Okay, I'm with you.
If you look at the bottle, read the label, and say, I fully believe this medicine can cure me. I acknowledge its historical origins. I agree with the science behind it. What happens to your disease?
Nothing. You still die because you didn't actually drink it.
Precisely. The medicine will not heal you unless it is actively applied to the wound or ingested into the body. Watson says that faith is the hand that reaches out, takes the medicine, and applies it to the soul. Without that specific action of personal application, without trusting your life to it, the medicine remains uselessly in the bottle.
So faith isn't just taking a theological true-false test and getting a passing grade.
No, Watson calls mere intellectual assent vain speculation. He boldly points out that the demons have intellectual assent. They know perfectly well that God exists, and they understand theology better than we do.
That's chilling.
It is. True faith involves resting your entire desperate weight upon Christ. It is an act of total reliance.
Okay, so let's say I reach out. I apply the medicine through faith. Watson argues that this inevitably leads to something called sanctification. And this is where things get really practical and honestly really challenging.
Yes, it does.
Sanctification is the slow, supernatural, progressive cleansing of your life. It's a process of actually becoming holy. And Watson calls this the earmark of God's elect. It's the visible proof that the faith isn't fake.
He uses two wonderful analogies to explain the nature of sanctification. The first involves an ancient Greek painter named Apelles. Apelles was famous because he was never satisfied with his portraits.
A perfectionist.
Very much so. It was said that he was only standing by his canvas, mending his pictures with a pencil, constantly touching them up, adding a slight hint of color here, fixing a shadow there, refining the lines.
So it was a constant, never-ending process of refinement.
Yes, and Watson says that our sanctification is exactly like that. When God saves you, he doesn't just stamp you perfect and leave you alone. God is the divine artist, constantly touching up his own image in you. He is always mending the picture.
Right.
Which means, crucially, that sanctification is progressive. It is never fully finished in this life. You are a permanent work in progress.
I love that. Sorry, I mean, that really changes my perspective. It removes the expectation of instant perfection. What's the second analogy he uses?
The analogy of dew versus sap. He notes that for many people, religion is purely external. It's like the morning dew sitting on the surface of a leaf.
Just on the outside.
Yeah, it sparkles beautifully in the early light. It looks incredibly refreshing. But as soon as the hot sun of persecution or temptation comes out, it evaporates instantly. It had no roots.
That's the meteor again, the flash in the pan.
Exactly. But true sanctification is intrinsic. It is internal. It's not dew on the leaf. It is sap, hidden deep within the root of the tree. It flows upward from the inside, giving quiet, enduring life to the entire plant, regardless of the weather outside.
And this distinction between external compliance, the dew, and internal transformation, the sap, is the heartbeat of Puritan theology. A justified believer, someone who has genuinely applied the medicine of faith, inevitably pursues obedience. Because the sap is in them, they want to be holy.
They desire it.
But this is exactly the point where I have to speak up for anyone listening who is currently feeling a knot forming in their stomach.
Why not?
Because this doctrine can feel incredibly heavy. It can feel crushing. Let's walk through the logic. Watson says sanctification growing in holiness, beating your sin, is the earmark, the absolute proof that you belong to God. But what happens when you look at your actual daily life?
You see the flaws.
You see so many weeds in your garden. You see that you still struggle with explosive anger or secret greed or crippling anxiety or lust or pride. If I am supposed to be looking more and more like the perfect image of Christ, but I keep failing the same tests year after year, how do I not just spiral into total despair? Doesn't looking for this earmark just lead to a terrifying lack of assurance?
It absolutely would lead to despair if Watson didn't provide such deep, profound pastoral comfort right alongside the demand for holiness. He is fully aware of how fragile the human conscience is.
Thank goodness.
He anticipates that exact spiral of anxiety. And his answer is one of the most counterintuitive, comforting things in the entire book. He says that growing less in one's own eyes is a sign of growth.
Wait, let me make sure I'm grasping this. You are saying that feeling worse about myself is a sign that I'm getting better. Growing less in your own eyes is a sign of growth.
Yes. Think about it mechanically. When you enter a dark, dusty room, you don't see the dust. You think the room is perfectly clean. But when someone throws open the curtains and the bright sunlight streams in, suddenly you see thousands of dust motes dancing in the air.
The room didn't get dirtier. There's just more light to expose what was already there.
Exactly. When the Holy Spirit begins to work in you, he shines more light into your soul. You begin to see the dust, the hidden selfishness, the subtle pride that you were completely blind to before. You feel more sinful, not necessarily because you are actually sinning more, but because your spiritual sensitivity has drastically increased. Your conscience is awake.
Wow.
Watson points out that the very fact that you weep over your sin, the very fact that you are fighting it, hating it, and feeling crushed by it, is the absolute proof that there is spiritual life within you.
And he has a specific phrase for this, right? I remember reading it in the notes, and it literally made me stop in my tracks.
He says, dead things don't combat.
Dead things don't combat. That is a complete mic drop moment. I want you, the listener, to really internalize this. If you are exhausted from fighting your own flaws, if you are tired of battling the same temptations and you feel like the struggle proves you are a hypocrite, Watson is looking across the centuries to tell you that a dead body doesn't fight a disease.
It just rots.
Right. A corpse doesn't have an immune system. The exhaustion you feel is the immune system of your soul fighting back. The enemy wants you to think the struggle means you're fake. Watson is saying the struggle is the undeniable pulse of a true Christian. The battle is the proof of life.
It flips the modern self-help narrative entirely upside down. Modern culture says if you feel bad, something is wrong, you need to fix your self-esteem. Watson says, if you feel the weight of your sin, congratulations, you are spiritually alive.
That is so freeing.
And Because the believer is truly fighting this war, because they have that living sap in the root, they're actually capable of experiencing deep, profound emotional realities that a dead soul cannot access. This brings us to what Watson calls the feast of the soul: assurance, peace, and perseverance.
Yes, because if you are alive and you are fighting, you get to eat the feast. The Christian life isn't just a grim death march against sin. Watson argues that true Christians can actually know with confidence that they are saved. That's
They
assurance.
don't have to guess.
Right. They can experience profound internal harmony even when the world is chaotic. That's peace. And they can trust that despite their failures, they will not fall away completely. That's perseverance. This
Yeah.
isn't just about surviving by the skin of your teeth, it's about thriving.
And there's always a Puritan both ways. Watson is careful to warn us that these emotional realities require active maintenance. Peace isn't something you achieve once and put on a shelf. He uses the brilliant analogy of a viol, which is an early stringed instrument similar to a violin or cello.
Okay, let's explore the mechanics of the viol.
If you take a beautifully crafted viol, but you let the strings go slack, what happens? The instrument is still structurally sound, it's still a viol, but if you try to play it, the music is entirely spoiled. You just get a horrible, jarring buzz.
So the potential for music is there, but it sounds awful.
Exactly. In the same way, Watson says, if Christians become slack in their daily duties, if you stop praying, if you ignore reading the Word, if you start indulging in secret sins and think it doesn't matter, you don't necessarily lose your salvation, but you completely spoil the sweet music of peace in your soul. God doesn't abandon you, but the feeling of His presence, the beautiful music of assurance, gets distorted and silent.
So you have to constantly tune the strings. And then he tackles the fear of falling away, the doctrine of perseverance. He uses the analogy of Atlas from Greek mythology. We all know the image of Atlas, kneeling down, holding the entire weight of the heavens on his shoulders. Watson says that the power of God is the Atlas that bears up the saints from falling into ruin.
Which is another profound psychological relief. If your perseverance depended on your own grip on God, you would fall today. Your hands are too weak. But your survival doesn't depend on your grip on Him. It depends entirely on His Atlas-like grip on you.
And even when we fail spectacularly, there is hope. He brings up the biblical story of Samson. Samson was given supernatural strength, but he flirted with sin, he compromised, his head was shaved, and he lost all his power. He was captured and blinded. But Watson notes something crucial.
What's that?
Samson's grace was drawn incredibly low, but it was not drawn completely dry. Just like his hair, which eventually began to grow back in the prison, God's grace in a true believer can be renewed even after terrible, catastrophic failures.
And this requires us to deeply examine ourselves, to distinguish between true peace and false peace. Because there are a lot of people walking around with a false sense of security.
How so?
Watson observes that a false peace actively hates being examined. It avoids the light at all costs. A person with false peace doesn't want to look too closely at their own motives. They get angry when a sermon challenges them. They distract themselves with noise because their peace is built on a very fragile illusion.
It's a house of cards. If you breathe on it, it collapses.
But true peace, Watson argues, actually survives self-examination. It welcomes the sunlight into the dusty room. Why? Because true peace doesn't rely on the illusion that you are perfect. It relies entirely on the reality of Christ's blood and God's power.
I pulled out a direct quote from the sources for the specific section because it hit me so incredibly hard. Watson writes, "Faith knows there are no impossibilities with God and will trust Him where it cannot trace Him."
Trust Him where it cannot trace Him. That is powerful.
Yes. Think about what it means to trace something. It means you can follow the line, you can see the logic, you can map out exactly how point A gets to point B. But so often in life, we cannot trace God's hand.
We have no idea what He's doing.
Exactly. We cannot understand why a tragedy happened, or why a prayer wasn't answered the way we wanted, or why the path has become so dark. When you can't trace the path, and it makes absolutely no sense, faith still trusts the character of the guide.
That is the ultimate grammar of doctrine in action.
Exactly. Think about the immense psychological relief that provides to you right now as a modern listener who is overwhelmed by anxiety, constantly trying to micromanage every single variable in your life to ensure a safe outcome. You don't have to trace the path. You don't have to have it all figured out. You just have to trust the Atlas who is holding up your world.
And that profound psychological relief leads directly to the ultimate relief, the final, grand destination of the human soul. Everything we have discussed today, building the foundation, weaving the silver thread of glory, relying on the mediator, fighting the war of sanctification, tuning the strings of peace, all of this earthly grounding is ultimately just a down payment.
A preview.
Yes. It is what the Puritans called an earnest, a foretaste for the
Yeah.
final reality, eternity with God.
And this brings us to our final segment. The Puritan faith was intensely eschatological.
Let's define that term for clarity. Eschatological means it was deeply oriented toward the end of all things, toward the ultimate culmination of history and the afterlife.
Right. They didn't view this earthly life as the main event. They truly believed the Apostle Paul's statement that death was gain. They viewed death not as a tragic end, but as transitioning to a magnificent, unending feast.
A radical shift in perspective.
Completely. They looked forward to a place of perfect union with other believers without any of the envy, bickering, or misunderstandings that plagued us here. And most importantly, they anticipated the beatific vision, the terrifying, beautiful joy of finally seeing God face to face without the need for a sheepskin.
Watson's theological imagination completely takes flight here. He searches for human language to describe the indescribable. He says that eternity is a sea without bottom and banks.
A sea without bottom and banks, it's boundless, it's fathomless. You can never hit the ocean floor of God's joy, and you can never hit the shoreline. It just goes on forever.
He also references an ancient Greek philosopher named Eudoxius. Eudoxius was a mathematician and astronomer who became so obsessed, so profoundly affected by the beauty and majesty of the physical sun, that he famously declared he believed he was born into the world for one single purpose, only to behold the sun.
Wow, that's dedication.
It is. And Watson takes that historical anecdote and applies it to the human soul. We were born to behold God. That is our truest nature. That is the silver thread finally fully woven into a perfect tapestry.
And he contrasts our current frustrating physical state with our future one. Right now, he says our bodies are like weak reeds. We get sick, we break down, we get tired, we age, we are fragile. But at the resurrection, he promises that these weak reeds will be raised in power. They will be firm, glorious, and unbreakable like a solid rock.
But as we talk about these glorious visions of heaven, it is absolutely critical that we contextualize them. We have to understand the historical reality Watson was living in when he wrote these words. The sources point out that he was writing during a period of intense, brutal persecution for the Puritans.
Yes, specifically after something called the Act of Uniformity in 1662. Can you explain what that was and what it did to Watson?
The Act of Uniformity was an English law that essentially demanded that all clergy strictly adhere to the rites and ceremonies of the Church of England, and it required them to use the newly revised Book of Common Prayer. It was a mechanism of state control over religion.
And the Puritans weren't okay with that.
Not at all. Thomas Watson, along with about 2,000 other Puritan ministers, believed in conscience that they could not comply with these rigid state-mandated rules. Because of his refusal, on August 24, 1662, a day, known as the Great Ejection, Watson was stripped of his pulpit at St. Stephen's Walbrook in London.
So he lost his job, his income, his platform, his parsonage, everything.
Everything. He was criminalized. He had to preach secretly in barns, in private homes, and in hidden woods, constantly at risk of being arrested and thrown into horrible, disease-ridden prisons. For him and for his terrified listeners, focusing on the sea without bottom and banks wasn't some kind of weak psychological escapism.
Right. It wasn't the modern critique of religion being the opiate of the masses or pie in the sky by and by, just to avoid dealing with the real world.
Exactly the opposite.
Yeah.
This intense, future-oriented spirituality was the very lens that gave their present earthly suffering profound, indestructible meaning. It gave them a titanium spine. When you genuinely know that your ultimate destination is a sea of bottomless joy, you can handle the loss of your property. You can handle the loss of your social status. You can even handle being thrown in prison.
The reality of heaven wasn't a distraction from the storm. It was the ultimate ballast in their ship that allowed them to sail straight through the teeth of persecution.
Yes, it held them steady.
So let's pull all of this together because we have covered an incredible amount of theological and emotional ground today. We started by seeing exactly why we need a solid foundation, why we have to learn the grammar of doctrine so we don't end up as wandering stars flashing brightly but burning out in the atmosphere.
The swamp gas meteors.
The swamp gas, yes. From there, we found the ultimate purpose of human life, weaving the silver thread of God's glory and our joy through the mundane realities of our daily routines, whether we are washing dishes, answering emails, or facing a crisis. We stared into the awe-inspiring, unchangeable attributes of God and realized that his omniscience actually sees the tiny flower of grace hiding beneath our weeds.
It sees the real you.
We saw how Christ the mediator bridged the terrifying gap of holiness, putting on the sheepskin of our frail humanity so we could approach him without fear. We talked about how to actually apply that sovereign medicine through the outstretched hand of faith.
Reaching out for it.
We learned that the painful, exhausting struggle with our own sin is not proof of failure, but the very earmark of life, because dead things don't come back. And finally, we saw how all this doctrine, all this grammar, produces a deep, durable peace that allows us to trust him where we cannot trace him, leading us ultimately to an eternity that is an endless, boundless ocean of joy.
And if there is one central unifying thread we want you to take away from this deep dive, it is that these 17th century Puritan truths are intensely, urgently personal for you today. God is not a cold, abstract concept trapped in a 300-year-old theology textbook. He is alive. As Watson beautifully says, he is the sun of the soul. He is actively ready to melt frozen hearts with his profound love. The entire architecture of this doctrine exists for one reason, so that the poetry of your personal relationship with him can absolutely flourish in the real world.
And that brings us perfectly back to where we started our conversation today. We thought we were opening up a dry, medical-style manual of historical theology, expecting to diagnose the soul with cold, academic precision. But instead, we found ourselves wading into the muddy, beautiful, turbulent waters of human experience and divine grace.
We really did.
We found a God who doesn't demand we be clean before we come, but who applies the eye salve, pleads like a mother, and breaks the chains. So, as we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to chew on today. It's based on one of Watson's most compelling, challenging images. He observes human nature and notes that we spend so much of our short, frantic lives chasing temporary comforts.
We're always running after something.
We chase money, we chase the approval of strangers on the internet, we chase status, we chase endless digital distraction to numb our minds. But Watson calls all of these things broken cisterns. Think about a cistern, a bucket meant to hold water. These earthly obsessions are buckets with massive holes in the bottom. You can pour your entire life's energy into them, but they will never, ever hold enough water to satisfy your deep internal thirst. They will always leak. You will always wake up thirsty again tomorrow.
They can't hold what you need.
But if the joys of heaven are truly described as an endless, fresh banquet, if eternity is a sea without bottom and banks, and if enjoying God doesn't just magically start after you die, but is meant to begin right now in your messy kitchen, in your stressful office, and in your tears, what broken cistern can you empty out today?
That's the question.
What leaky bucket are you exhausted from carrying around that you need to finally set down so that you can make room for the boundless ocean of God's presence? Think about it.